The words sliced through the celebration like a phantom whisper. "Sir, she's too weak to beg." Ethan Walker turned, the clinking glasses and laughter of the party fading as he tried to place the voice. He stood on the terrace of a beachfront resort, a shimmering beacon of wealth where New York's most powerful people gathered under silk canopies, the scent of jasmine and expensive wine perfuming the sea air. The ocean hummed nearby, but that tiny voice had pulled his focus from everything. He glanced down to see a small girl, no older than 4, standing barefoot on the cool marble. Her dress was worn and frayed, her face thin. In her hands, she clutched a crumpled, damp flyer for the event, on which a polished, smiling image of Ethan, the CEO of Walker Global, stared back. "Sir," she said again, her voice even softer, "she's just too weak." Ethan's brow furrowed. Before he could form a question, 2 security guards moved toward the child, their intent clear. "Wait," Ethan commanded, raising a hand. "Don't lay a finger on her." The girl still flinched, but then her small hand darted out and grabbed his. Her fingers were shockingly cold. "Please," she breathed. This way, he allowed her to guide him, away from the stunned guests and the rising tide of murmurs. They moved through a garden and down a cobblestone path behind the main building, leaving the music and festivities behind. The little girl's grip was firm, a silent, determined tow rope pulling him into the shadows. They passed the valet and entered the dimly lit employee parking lot. Gleaming luxury cars sat like sleeping beasts, but she led him past them all to a far corner where a beat-up, rusted sedan was parked, almost hidden. The car was trembling, a slight, unnatural shudder. Its engine was off. This vehicle had no business being here. A knot of dread tightened in Ethan's chest as he neared the back of the car. "Is there someone in the trunk?" he asked, his voice low. The girl simply nodded. She couldn't walk. He hesitated for a second, then triggered the trunk latch. The lid popped open, and he froze. A woman was curled inside, crumpled and motionless. Her dark, tangled hair obscured much of her face, and her thin arms were wrapped around herself as if for warmth. Her lips were pale, barely parted, but her face, dear God, that face. The world narrowed, and 5 years evaporated in an instant. Amara. She had disappeared after a car crash everyone called a tragic accident. There was never a body, just the mangled wreck of her car and a flurry of headlines. He had mourned her, buried an empty coffin, and locked her memory away. Yet here she was, clinging to life. He reached in instinctively, his fingers finding the faint, thready pulse at her neck. His voice was trapped in his throat. Beside him, the little girl whispered, "She always said you were real." Just then, his guard arrived, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Sir, what's going on?" one asked. Ethan shielded the car with his body. "Call an ambulance," he ordered, his voice sharp with authority. Now, he turned back and gently lifted Amara from the trunk. She was impossibly light. Her eyelids fluttered, and as she looked at him, a flicker of recognition crossed her features, even through the haze of pain. He carried her to the back of his own car, laying her down carefully on the plush seats. The girl climbed in beside the woman, taking her hand. "She's my mama," she stated, her tired eyes looking up at him with a fierce protectiveness. Ethan swallowed, the reality of the situation crashing down on him. "What's your name?" he asked the child. "Zuri." He nodded slowly, his mind racing to connect the impossible dots. The woman he'd lost, the daughter he never knew. "We're going to get her help," he promised quietly. "I promise you," as distant sirens wailed, echoing over the sound of the waves. He stared at the woman he had loved more than life itself, her chest rising and falling in a fragile rhythm, like hope taking its first breath after a long, dark silence. The girl leaned closer to her mother, repeating her earlier words like a secret prayer. "She's too weak to beg, but she's not too weak to remember." Ethan strode through the hospital's automatic doors, Zuri's small hand still locked in his. He had watched as she held onto her mother's limp hand while paramedics rushed the gurney down the hall. "My name is Ethan Walker," he told the receptionist, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "I found them. They need immediate help." He used his influence to keep the press away, ensuring Amara's mysterious reappearance remained private. Soon, she was in the emergency wing, and Zuri was settled in a quiet waiting area with crayons and a cup of cocoa. Ethan, still in the tuxedo from his gala, paced the sterile linoleum floor, feeling utterly exposed. 5 years ago, he had fallen for Amara Johnson, a brilliant art student with eyes that saw the world in vibrant color. She had painted with a passion that challenged his rigid, corporate existence, refusing his father's attempts to formalize their relationship into a business arrangement. She wanted love, not a merger. "I can't be someone I'm not, Ethan," she had told him during their last conversation, her voice shaking. Hours later, her car was found at the bottom of a cliff. There was no body, only silence. A nurse interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Walker, the little girl is fine, just dehydrated. We have her in the pediatric wing." He walked over to find Zuri bent over a drawing pad. "She sings to me," Zuri said without looking up. "Even when she's really tired, she sings." Ethan's breath caught. Amara used to sing a soft, wordless lullaby to him on rainy nights in his apartment. It was her quiet way of loving him, a melody meant only for his ears. "She calls you," Zuri added suddenly. He froze. "E," he repeated, the nickname only Amara had ever used. Zuri nodded. "She said your real name was too big for her heart when she missed you." His chest tightened. His hands began to shake. He knelt beside the small child. "Zuri, why did you come find me tonight?" She held up the crumpled flyer. "I saw your picture. I knew you would help." He remembered tossing a few of those flyers near the resort entrance, never imagining one would find its way into these tiny, determined hands. Looking into her eyes, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. "Thank you for trusting me." She leaned against him, her small body heavy with exhaustion. "Don't leave her again," she mumbled. Later, Ethan stood at the nurse's station, demanding any information he could get. When the head nurse was hesitant, he slid his business card across the counter. "Ethan Walker. Call me directly if there are any issues." He returned to the quiet hallway, staring at the closed door to Amara's room. Zuri's bright, innocent chatter echoed in his mind, a stark contrast to the horror that had brought them here. And yet, everything about this little girl, her words, her eyes, her simple drawings, pointed to a truth he hadn't dared to dream. The woman in that trunk was Amara, alive, and somehow, against all odds, she had given him a daughter. He closed his eyes, whispering into the dim corridor, "I won't lose you again." Amara awoke to a sterile hum and the blur of fluorescent lights. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was back in the dark, silent cell where she had spent years. Panic seized her, but then the scent of antiseptic, the feel of clean sheets, and the steady rhythm of a heart monitor grounded her. She saw him then. Ethan was standing near the door, his expression a mixture of shock, grief, and disbelief. She flinched away. "I know you," she rasped, her voice raw. "You're not safe." He stepped forward cautiously. "You're safe now, Amara," he said gently. "You're home." She shook her head, tears tracing paths down her cheeks. "Don't. I don't know what's real anymore." Her voice broke. As their eyes met, a spark of recognition passed between them. Her breath hitched. Zuri stirred from a chair at the bedside, climbing up to gently place a small sketch pad and a pencil in her mother's trembling hand. "Draw, Mama," she whispered. "You can do it." Amara stared at the pencil as if it were a weapon, a memory too sharp to hold. She tried to draw, but her hand shook violently, creating only chaotic, painful lines. With a sob, she pressed her palm against the page, smearing the graphite. Later, Ethan brought a tray with soup, juice, and bread. He said nothing, simply placing it beside her. He then sat on the floor with Zuri, helping her draw. "A beach," Zuri announced, pointing at the bright colors. "Mama's favorite." Amara turned her head slightly. He was sketching a sun bursting over the ocean, a scene from a dream they once shared of running away together. A lump formed her throat. "The sun always comes back," Ethan murmured, his eyes meeting hers over the drawing. That night, he made sure Zuri ate and brought juice for Amara. When she refused, he held the cup for her, waiting patiently until she took a slow, cautious sip, her eyes never leaving his. In the days that followed, Ethan was a constant, quiet presence. He began a discreet investigation, pulling strings, asking private contacts about trafficking rings in Eastern Europe. He suspected a connection to a name Zuri had mumbled in her sleep, and he feared what he might find. For now, he kept his powerful father out of it. On the third morning, Amara watched him and Zuri sharing crayons, their soft laughter filling the quiet room. The sight broke something open inside her. He hadn't flinched from Zuri, hadn't questioned her. He simply cared. She began to sob into her blanket. Ethan came to her side, startled. He knelt and offered her a spoonful of soup. She hesitated, then her trembling hand accepted it. After a moment, she whispered, "Did you know that she's your daughter?" Ethan swallowed hard. "I hoped," he admitted, "but I didn't know for sure until now." Amara's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I wanted to tell you," she choked out, "but they took me." "I couldn't." He reached out and took her hand. "You're not alone anymore." They sat in silence, until she finally let her fingers rest in his. He held her hand as if it were the most fragile thing in the world. Zuri curled in her mother's side, and for a long moment, they were just there, a mother, a daughter, and the man who had lost them both and found them again. The afternoon light cast long shadows across the hospital room floor. Ethan sat beside Amara's bed, holding a sleeping Zuri on his lap. A fragile peace had settled between them, born of exhaustion and a fledgling trust. Amara stared at the ceiling for a long time before she turned to him. "I'm afraid," she said, her voice thin as thread. "I don't belong in your world anymore," he swallowed. "You belong with us," he answered gently. She looked from her daughter to him. "I was in a basement in Eastern Europe. They moved me around like cargo. No name, no identity. I only survived by picturing your face." Her lips trembled as tears gathered in her eyes. "In all that darkness, after years, I heard them talk about a man who funded them. They called him Mr. Walker." The name hung in the air, and the world seemed to tilt. Ethan's knuckles went white as he held Zuri tighter. "He's part of my family's business," he said quietly, a cold dread seeping into him. Amara winced. "I never saw him, but his name was whispered like a prayer and a curse. When I was scared, I would whisper your name to fight back." Ethan leaned forward, his eyes dark with a gathering storm. "You never told me about this." She looked at him, torn. "I was moved between cells, sold. They took another baby from me. I never saw her again." She closed her eyes, touching Zuri's hair. Ethan felt her grief like a physical blow. He gently placed his hand over hers. "I'll find out who did this to you, Amara. I don't care who it is." Over the next few days, he dug into private company files and offshore accounts, uncovering a network of shell charities in Eastern Europe funded by his family's foundation. That night, he went to his father's mansion and let himself into a private study he had never been allowed to enter. He searched until he found it, a small, gold pendant with an engraved initial. His hand shook. He had given that necklace to Amara under a willow tree on their college campus. A silent, cold fury built in his chest. The next morning, he returned to the hospital and laid the pendant on the bedside table next to Zuri's latest drawing of a sun breaking through storm clouds. Amara stared at it, and tears began to pour down her face. "How?" she started. Ethan's gaze was unflinching. "In that basement, did they ever talk about money, about donations or gift from Mr. Walker?" Amara nodded, her face pale. "They called it charity," she whispered. "But we knew we had price tags. The name was an indictment." Silence stretched between them. He stood and opened the blinds, flooding the room with sunlight. "I want records," he said, his voice hard. "Bank transfers, offshore accounts, anything connected to Walker Global's foundation." Amara reached for his hand. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you." He squeezed her wrist. "You came back alive. That's all that matters." That evening, in his own study, he laid out the financial ledgers. He cross-referenced accounts with shipping logs and charity filings. He traced millions of dollars funneled from their corporate foundation to opaque nonprofits over the past 5 years, all authorized by his father. He found the entry that corresponded with the year Amara vanished. He stared at the date, at the amount. He leaned back, his breath shallow, as the monstrous truth settled over him. His own father had financed the very trafficking ring that had stolen Amara. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I will not let her suffer again." The air in the elder Mr. Walker's study was heavy with the scent of leather and smug authority. Ethan stood before him, clutching a folder of evidence. "You summoned me," his father said coolly, regarding him with detached appraisal. "We need to talk," Ethan replied, his voice firm. "You taught me this world was a cruel place, father. You just never told me you were one of the ones directing the cruelty." He slid bank statements and ledger pages across the polished desk. "Explain these. Charitable donations sent to Eastern Europe, right, when Amara disappeared." His father's mask of composure slipped. "Those were strategic investments. Reputation management." Ethan's intake of breath was sharp. "Investments? In human trafficking?" "I found the ledgers, father. I found Amara's pendant in your safe." His father leaned back, his expression hardening into cold steel. "The world is a harsh place. I was protecting our family name from weakness, from scandal. I did what was necessary to protect the company." "You protected the company by funding the darkness," Ethan said, his voice dangerously quiet. The old man rose from his chair. "That girl was going to be your ruin. I removed an obstacle before it destroyed everything I built." A profound silence filled the room as Ethan felt a lifetime of loyalty shatter. "You weaponized our power." His father's jaw was rigid. "Everything I have ever done was for this family." Ethan stepped forward, his heart pounding. "Then I am no longer your son, and I am no longer your heir." He left the incriminating documents on the desk. "Walker Global is not my legacy. Justice is." "You would throw away everything," his father sneered. Ethan's voice did not waver. "I would burn an empire to the ground if it was built on this kind of pain." That evening, Ethan returned to the hospital carrying only a small coat and Zuri's sketchbook. Amara was sitting up in bed, looking pale but stronger. "I resigned," he said softly, closing the door behind him. She looked up confused. "What?" "I'm done with Walker Global," he clarified. "I refuse to be part of it. I'll expose everything." He gently lifted a sleeping Zuri into his arms. "I'm going to work with foundations that actually help people." Tears welled in Amara's eyes. "You're risking everything for me." He brushed a stray curl from her face. "Nothing matters more than the truth." He showed her Zuri's latest drawing, a bright sun breaking through dark storm clouds. Amara traced the lines with a trembling finger as Zuri nestled closer to him. "We're going to rebuild, Amara," he said softly. Together, this wasn't a confrontation of fists and shouting. It was a quiet earthquake of integrity. He had chosen justice over inheritance, vulnerability over power. He sat with them long into the night, the weight of his father's empire no longer worth his silence. Amara stared out the window of the small cabin, watching the dawn mist curl through the pine trees. Ethan sat across from her at a simple wooden table, a set of pencils and fresh paper between them. In the next room, Zuri slept soundly. "You don't have to go back to that world," he said gently, breaking the tense silence. The cameras, the headlines, her voice trembled. "I survived by being invisible. I'm afraid being seen now will break me all over again." He leaned forward. "I don't need you to be the CEO's long-lost love. I just need you to be Amara, the woman I fell in love with." Her eyes glistened. "That woman is gone." He shook his head. "She never left. She just needed a safe place to rest." He had brought them here, to this remote haven, to heal away from the looming storm of the media. "Why are we here?" she asked. "To breathe," he answered. "To find out who we are now." Zuri appeared in the doorway, clutching her own sketchbook. "Mama, draw with me," she said. Amara hesitated, her fingers hovering over the paper. She sketched a shaky, empty horizon. Ethan began drawing beside her, adding a gentle sky and a calm sea. For the first time, Amara felt she wasn't just tracing her pain. She was creating light. Later, he cooked them a simple meal. As she watched him serve Zuri, his movements full of a quiet, steady tenderness, she felt a crack in the armor around her heart. "Why are you doing this?" she asked after Zuri was in bed. He paused. Because the woman who was in that hospital bed deserves kindness, not pity. And I want to be the man who walks beside her. She swallowed hard. I was pregnant before, she whispered, her voice raw with a grief she had carried alone for years. I lost the baby. I thought I wasn't worthy of love after that. Ethan's eyes filled with sorrow. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. I know, and you are worthy of all the love in the world. He stood, came around the table, and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. I want to build something real with you, Amara. Tears spilled down her cheeks as he pulled her into a trembling embrace. I want that too, she sobbed into his chest. Their lips met, a hesitant, gentle kiss that bridged years of pain and loss. When they pulled back, their foreheads touching, he whispered, I'm here. Always, Zuri patted out, barefoot and sleepy, and dove in her mother's lap. Amara held her daughter close, her eyes locked on Ethan's. I think, she said, a small, fragile smile appearing on her face. I'm starting to remember how to do this. He rested his cheek on Zuri's head. And I'm remembering why I fell in love in the first place in the soft morning light. They were three fragile figures, bound by a terrible truth, but building a new one based on forgiveness and the quiet love born from tragedy. Ethan stood before the silent, tense boardroom of Walker Global. This recording, he announced, his voice clear and steady, was provided by a former executive assistant to my father. She recorded conversations where he authorized large fund transfers, labeled as philanthropy, to shell corporations overseas. He pressed play. A woman's voice filled the room, explaining how funds from the Walker Trust coincided with reports of disappearances in Eastern Europe. We suspected trafficking, she said. Another voice, shaky but firm, added, he knew exactly what that money was for. The room crackled with tension. Ethan stopped the recording. I cannot allow a legacy of abuse to continue. The news exploded. Headlines condemned Gregory Walker. At an emergency board meeting, Ethan presented every shred of evidence he had. I hereby resign as CEO, he declared. I refuse to lead an organization built on such a foundation. A board member stood, his voice trembling. We have to contain this. Ethan met his gaze. No, he said calmly. We have to rebuild trust. I am establishing a new nonprofit, the Zuri's Light Foundation, dedicated to helping survivors like Amara. He left the gleaming corporate tower behind and drove to the cabin. Amara was sitting on the porch, watching Zuri chase butterflies. He approached slowly. I did what I promised, he said. She looked at him, her eyes searching his, and then nodded. You did. Will you partner with me? He asked. Be an advisor for Zuri's Light. Help us build programs for other survivors. Using your art. Amara's breath caught. She looked at Zuri, then back at him. Can I really draw for people again? He gently tucked her hair behind her ear. I want you to teach others how to heal. Yes, she breathed, relief and purpose flooding her face. In the following weeks, they visited shelters, piloting art workshops. Amara led sketching exercises while Ethan handled the logistics, and Zuri brought infectious laughter to every room. One evening, a survivor timidly presented Amara with a painting she had made. It showed a car trunk, but instead of darkness, a brilliant light was pouring out. Amara looked at Ethan, her eyes full of emotion. It's working, she whispered. It's healing. He took her hand. Because you chose the truth, their eyes met, reflecting a bond forged in the deepest darkness and redeemed by courage. Zuri tugged on their hands, pulling them into a group hug. You helped build something real, he said softly to Amara. She looked at their small, strong family. And you, she replied, gave me back myself. 1 year to the day after Zuri had pulled on his suit jacket, Ethan, Amara, and Zuri stood in a small Brooklyn gallery. The air smelled of fresh paint and flowers. The exhibit was called Return from Silence, and at its heart was a large canvas titled The Trunk and the Light. It depicted a dark, cramped space, but from the opening of the trunk poured a brilliant, hopeful glow, a small child's hand reaching toward it. The shadowed figure inside was fragile, but her own hand was reaching for the light. Guests moved through the gallery, their hushed tones a sign of reverence not just for the art, but for the story of survival it told. A woman approached Amara. "This is so powerful. Thank you for sharing it." Amara nodded, her eyes shining. She turned to Ethan and whispered, "Let's build a world Zuri never has to escape from." He squeezed her hand and their daughters. Tears of healing, not pain, slipped down Amara's cheeks. In that quiet touch, there were no corporate titles or broken legacies, only the acknowledgement of a love that had endured the unthinkable. Zuri ran forward and pointed at the painting that held her history. "Do you see the light, sweetheart?" Ethan whispered, crouching beside her. She nodded, pointing to the glow on the canvas. "That's you," he said softly. "You bring the light." A profound sense of peace settled over Amara. She turned to a group of children who had gathered, demonstrating how to hold a pastel crayon. Ethan moved quietly behind them, gathering their coats. He placed his hands on her shoulders, and she leaned back into his touch. The painting glowed, their story transformed into color and hope. "I want to teach art to children who feel lost," she said, her voice steady. He kissed her forehead. "Then that's what we'll do." Hand in hand, they stood before their story, reframed into something new. Art that heals, love that perseveres, and the promise of a world no child would ever need to flee. In the quiet, glowing gallery, they found their beginning. If this story stirred something deep within you, if it reminded you of the power of love, resilience, and second chances, then we invite you to stay with us. At Ball Bouncers Tales, we share emotional, heartwarming tales like this every week. Stories that heal, that inspire, that remind us all of what really matters. Subscribe to Ball Bouncers Tales so you never miss a moment that might change your heart or your life. And if the trunk and the light moved you, please like, share, and tell us in the comments what would you do for love that refuses to give up. Thank you for watching, and remember, every soul has a story.